Pro Football Playbook, presented by the Pigskin Podcast Network. Your source for team news, draft needs, player profiles and rankings, full Senior Bowl, Combine, and NFL draft coverage. News, analysis, discussion. It's in the playbook. Now, here is your host, sports journalist Bill Alvstad, and featured analyst Keith Myers. Hey, Pro Football fans. Welcome into the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. We're continuing our long series looking at every team, evaluating team rosters. Up this week is the Houston Texans and the Indianapolis Colts. Keith, welcome in.
Yeah, two teams that are kind of on, opposite ends of the competitive spectrum. The Colts are a team that's on the verge. They kind of felt like they were a quarterback away, and Carson Wentz turned out not to be that guy. Whereas Houston is in the midst of a complete and total rebuild, and they've got a ways to go. So let's jump into Houston first because, well, alphabetical order, and also because they're an interesting team in that, new regime, new everything. They finally got out from underneath this Deshaun Watson saga, and now they can start building in earnest. And so kind of an interesting, blank slate for them going into this offseason.
Strangely enough, I thought that the Lovie Smith as head coach hire was actually a really good move for them. Lovie Smith's kind of been around the league. I think he's coached over 40 years. In various different positions and so forth. He's very well respected with players, and that's key with this team because prior regimes have just not had that. And he comes in, blows the thing completely open. They kind of have an opportunity now to build around Davis Mills a little bit. They gave him a vote of confidence by not getting a guy in the draft. And he didn't perform terrible last year. He wasn't perfect, but as a rookie coming in on a bad roster, I thought he did a pretty decent job. Now they get a chance to kind of build around that. I thought they had an okay offseason as far as free agency was concerned, but I thought during the draft they really had an opportunity to improve their roster and did, I thought.
I agree. I think they had, they had just a ton of draft capital and could really just, go get guys because they're picking at the top of every round and went and got some talent. I like what they did in the draft. So, and it started with Derek Stingley Jr. With the third pick. Now, he was thought of as the second best corner.
Up a pick to me.
I really kind of expected them to go offensive line
or
with that
defensive
pick.
end.
Yeah. But Derek Stingley Jr. is an absolute, he is such a good prospect. Like, he's the type of guy that you can go and, build a defense around. I know it's been, people are like, the critics are gonna be like, oh, it's been a couple of years since, he did that. He looked out of 2019 like he was going to be first pick in the draft, Deion Sanders kind of, type of cornerback. And then, he got hurt. And then there was the COVID year. So, it's been a couple of years, but there's no doubting just the extreme talent that he's got. He's a difference maker. And so while it was shocking because everyone kind of expected them to go in a different direction, it's not that shocking because he's one of the better just pure athletes in the draft.
Yeah, I think, before they got to the draft, they made the Deshaun Watson trade, got him out of the way. It cleared a whole bunch of stuff out of Houston's situation, including some salary cap relief, a little bit of that, but mostly just getting that drama off the team, moving on, being able to collect some draft picks, as you said. I thought they did as best as anybody could possibly imagine in that trade. And then they went into the draft with a boatload of picks. Like you said, Stingley, I think, is underrated, if you can say that, just because everyone kind of put those injuries on him, I think, and dropped him in the draft. And he's clearly a top 5 talent. So he'll be able to go out and try to prove that. And then their second pick, Kenyon Green, number 15 overall, thought slightly early for that pick, but solves an interior offensive line issue for the Texans. And then Jalen Petrie, one of my favorite picks in the draft, 37 overall, as a versatile safety prospect for them. Defensive back, can play the slot, can play pretty much all over the place for them. And took a chance on wide receiver John Mechie, the third out of Alabama, after he had the ACL. And so and Christian Harris and Damian Pierce. I mean, quite frankly, the top 5 or 6 guys in this draft, selection wise for them, have a chance to really come in right away and compete for either starting or high rotation roles.
Oh, I agree with that. I think that if you look at it, all the guys that you've mentioned, Harris, Pierce, Petrie and Stingley Jr. should all be starters on day one. Oh, and Green, I missed that one. Mechie would be, except that, he probably isn't going to be playing week 1 because he's coming back from that injury. But once he's back, he'll be a starter too. That's a lot of talent to add in one draft class.
I understand they really love Christian Harris, but they have one of the best linebacking groups, I think, overall in the NFL. That's one of their strongest position groups that they've got there, with Camus, Gruger Hill, and Christian Kirksey holding down the middle linebacker spot. But Christian Harris is going to push for that spot sooner rather than later. I think they really like his work ethic. They like the way that he moves for their defense. So that's going to be interesting. And then they kind of remade their running back room from last year. Last year, they were kind of a hot mess. And so this year, they're basically starting from scratch. They've got Marlon Mack comes in and Rex Burkhead, but then Damian Pierce is going to push right away. The rub on Damian Pierce in the draft and why he kind of fell into the 4th round or so, 5th round, was that he just didn't have a lot of snaps where he was at Florida. But when he did have snaps, his production was really high. And he's the type of a kind of a bruiser back that's going to be able to carry it through the tackles for them and pick up yards after contact. It's exactly what they want to do. And Lovie Smith, Lovie Smith's kind of a defensive guy, but that's the way he wants to run his offense. He wants to establish the run to be able to help out his young quarterback there.
Yeah, and being able to run the ball, being able to get those quick passes, that kind of stuff is great. But they've also got guys that can stretch the field. Brandon Cooks, Philip Dorsett can keep the safeties honest, make sure that they stay back to create space underneath.
When Michie comes in, holy cow! I mean, he's going to be the class of the pile there.
Absolutely. Sure. So they've got some talent, they've got some weapons, and I actually kind of like they've got a start of an offensive line in Laramie Tunsil and Kenyon Green. Their last 2 first-round picks in the last 2 years on the left side. That's a great start to building a great line. Justin Britt, AJ Cann, and Titus Howard fill out that line. I think the right side's going to be a little weaker. It's going to be the weekend of it, but that's a lot of talent on the left side, and it's really them starting to build could be a great offensive line.
I think it's going to be 2 or 3 year project here. There's no illusions here. They have one of the worst rosters in the NFL, but they're starting to improve some key positions. The offensive line you mentioned, wide receiver, they've got some skilled positions now. Damian Pierce is going to be able to come in and run the ball right away. Give Davis Mills a chance to fortify his spot there. I think he had like a 88 or 89 passer rating last year, threw for like 2,700 yards, didn't throw a lot of interceptions, a few touchdowns. So he's got a chance to improve under an improved offensive line there as well. So it'll be interesting. I like what they're doing. I mean, I know you've been in particular, and for me too, but you really kind of highlighted how a hot mess this franchise has been for a while, and how awful the roster has been. 4 wins last year. They're not going to fool anybody. They're going to be stretched to get to maybe 6 or 7 wins this year, but they are on an ascending path, which is good news for that fan base, because if you're going to stick around with a team that's going to be down for for 2 or 3 years, which they have been, even with Deshaun Watson while he was there. It's an endurance race. And once you finally figure out that you're cresting the hill a little bit and now you're kind of climbing, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I will say though that while they get Stingley Jr. and Petrie like up to speed and on the field and whatnot, I'm not sure how good this defense is going to be. Yeah, they've got good linebackers and the talent. Adding those two to the secondary is going to be great, but I am not impressed with their defensive line.
No,
I mean,
that's their weak spot for sure.
And you can't be weak in the trenches and do well. And that's one of the things that we talk about. Like, there's reasons to have some optimism and recognize that this team is going in the right direction and they're improving. But there's also, the glaring weaknesses like the right side of the offensive line and the defensive line that show you they're not ready for prime time yet. They have an opportunity to get there in a year if they make the right moves. But right now, they're still at least a year away.
And Lovie Smith will not accept complacency or lack of help. And he's going to be kind of the defensive coordinator there as well as the head coach. And Pep Hamilton, which I highly respect as an offensive coordinator, originally came through the Chargers system and was out there last year as kind of being an offensive coordinator guy. And so this year comes in as an offensive coordinator for them. And I like him. He's kind of innovative and, he'll have a nice, well-balanced approach. So I just think it's a franchise on the upswing. It's about time. They've been kind of in the doldrums for a little bit, especially with, ownership and all that kind of stuff. It's just been kind of a hot mess. I still see them though, finishing last or second to last in the division though. It's just, it's going to be a little bit.
6 wins is going to be kind of where I expect them, but what I expect them to be is more competitive. They're not going to get blown out in the same way that they were last year. They're going to be in more games, even if they don't come out on top of them. They're going to be more entertaining. They're going to be there's going to be reason for optimism coming out of this season for their fan base, and that's important.
So moving on to the Indianapolis Colts, probably one of the most interesting conversations I think that you and I will have in this series in the idea that they moved on. They invested in their quarterback last year. I thought they had that handled. Didn't work out. Traded in the off season here. Luckily, I mean, I don't even know how really. And then they got compensation back and so forth. Carson Wentz. And then they went out and they were able to get Matt Ryan from Atlanta. And I know that everyone thinks that Matt's kind of washed up and so forth, and that may very well end up being true, and it may not. He might have a little bit of a resurgence with this situation. But I know one thing for sure. He's extremely well respected around the league. And on this team, it is completely revitalized their belief that they can get some things done on offense this year. Frank Reich and Marcus Bradley, their offensive coordinator. And then on the other side, Keith, they brought in Gus Bradley as the DC, and they've got a whole new defense this year, which is going to be interesting based on the old Pete Carroll type defense.
Yeah, but if you look at what Gus Bradley has done, like when he was with the Chargers, he has ventured away from the old Pete Carroll defense and has shown to be more innovative and willing to do different things. So I actually really like him as a defensive coordinator. I know it didn't really work out for him as a head coach, but as a defensive coordinator, he has improved the defense everywhere he's been. And so that's a great hire for them, and they kind of need it. Like this is a roster that is really solid, but for some reason they just can't seem to get through where they're actually, a playoff team and competitive. And, last year they went into the last week of the game where they got to play Jacksonville, with the team that ended up the first overall pick in the draft because they were that bad. and it was a win and you're in situation for them, and they lost. They
Mm-hmm.
lost to Jacksonville in that situation, and you go, all right, so maybe they're not who we thought they were. But then you look at the roster and you're like, no, there's a lot to like here. And, watching the tape, Carson Wentz was bad. I can't believe Washington gave up anything to take him in that contract away.
I agree.
Like, that's just absurd. But you know what? Credit the Indy front office for getting it done.
So what did you think of their offseason as far as free agency is concerned? They didn't have a tremendous amount of free agency moves. Mm-hmm. I think Yannick and Ndakwe came over. Other than that, maybe Stephon Gilmore came in there.
Those are some names.
They've got DeForest Buckner at defensive tackle. I mean, they've got a nice defense. Darius Leonard at linebacker is a nice piece. They mostly added depth, though. So you take a look at their free agency and then in their draft. They really didn't get a lot of starters. I mean, you could argue that maybe Alec Pierce has a chance to start on the outside at one of the wide receiver spots for them, opposite like Michael Pittman. Because Paris Campbell's going to play in the slot, and then after that, it's really kind of I mean, they're wide receivers. I was to be completely honest, I thought that they would invest a little bit more in those, given the fact that they now have a quarterback to throw the ball around a little bit to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just looked at where they were in the draft. I mean, their first pick didn't come until 53. Pick 21 in round 2. And then they picked 73, 77, and 96. Those are their only top 100 picks. Those are their only top 150 picks. So those, they just didn't have draft capital to throw around and use in this. And they kind of just had to take what came to them. Yeah. Alec Pierce is probably a number 3 at wide receiver. Good player, but maybe not, breakthrough starter. Jelani Woods at tight end, I think, is a guy that can develop into a good player, even though he's not there. I like the Bernard Raymond pick, offensive tackle out of Central Michigan. I think he's a guy that can come in and probably be their swing tackle right away. There's talk that he might actually end up starting at guard, which I think would be crazy given the talent they've got there on the offensive line. But people are talking about it, him at right guard. But I think it's more he's going to be the swing tackle and then have an opportunity to win a job going forward. I mean, they did well given what they little safety or what little capital they had. They just didn't have a lot of picks.
Yeah, here's the deal. They've got can they win the division with the Titans sitting there? And I don't know. I
think they can.
I mean, Jonathan Stewart, no one's going to argue that he's one of the best running backs in the NFL. Now Matt Ryan comes on board. You've got a few guys that you can throw to, including Alex Cox. They drafted Jelani Woods, who's a pass-catching tight end, at 249 pounds, but runs like
Paris
a 4
Campbell,
or 5.
Michael Pittman Jr., and now Alec Pierce added to the mix. I mean, that's
Nyheim Hines is a great receiver out of the backfield.
Yeah. But then you look at the offensive line. Ryan Kelly is good. Quentin Nelson is arguably the best guard in the NFL. Matt Pryor has been playing well. Braden Smith, I think, is underrated at right tackle. They've got an offensive line that they can run behind. Jonathan Taylor is going to have a big year.
When you give Matt Ryan time, he can pick you apart. His arm might be toast. He might not be able to throw it 50 yards down the field anymore, but he can throw those 20-yard outs all day. And if he's got time, they can march the ball down the field with Jonathan Taylor picking up short yardage and breaking away at certain points from all over the field. He can take it to the house. So what do you think about their defense, Keith?
So their defense has some really nice pieces. And this is where, you mentioned DeForest Buckner, and now you add Yannick
I
Go
know.
Quay. To their defensive line. I think Grover Stewart's also one of those guys that it's not a name that people hear a lot and think of, but he's better than people think. I like the way their defense is put together.
Yeah,
Nick
and you didn't even
Cross.
mention Kwity Paye, which
I
is,
just skipped right over that.
yeah, he's one of the best defensive ends, in the business. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with their defense. It's I think they've got an average secondary. They've got a really pretty decent linebacker core, and I think their front line is maybe the best in the division. Although the Titans also are looking pretty good there as well. I don't know. I mean, what did they win last year, Keith? Were they a 9-win team?
I believe they were.
And so you've got to think that maybe is Matt Ryan good enough with basically the same starting lineup able to push them to 10 or 11 wins? And I'm not sure.
I think he is, simply because if you look at just pure stats and you go, well, maybe it wasn't quite so bad last year, but then you look at when the individual stats were compiled, and it seemed that in big spots, like if the game was close or late in the game when they needed a drive, or at the end of the season when they just needed a win, those were when Carson Wentz came up small, like just absolutely did not play well. What they needed was someone who could come up and just be steady and be a little more, clutch, for the lack of a better word, and just
decisive,
play,
right?
Yeah, just play better when it mattered. And Matt Ryan's going to give him that.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree. No, I agree. Yeah, I mean, the AFC, dude.
The AFC is rough. Getting into the playoffs. Is hard.
Right.
Getting out of the playoffs is going to feel impossible. AFC is rough. So the Colts were very close to a playoff team. I think their roster is good enough to be a playoff team. They just didn't have the quarterback play. But they were there last year. I think they've improved, but the rest of the conference as a whole is also improved. It's going to be tough to get into the playoffs. And then you look at, once you're in, just the murderous row of, teams that you're going to have to play to get through the playoffs it's crazy.
Yeah, they may not make it. They may not make it. I mean, think about the playoff teams. So what do you got? 7 teams in the playoffs? So you're going to have Buffalo, New England, maybe Baltimore, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Indianapolis,
the entire AFC West,
Tennessee, Denver, Kansas City, Los Angeles, Las Vegas. Somebody's got to go. And quite honestly, you're going to pick Indianapolis like 9 out of 10 times to not make it in that crowd.
Yeah.
It is what it is. And I don't even know if 10 wins is going to get that to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to hope that the AFC West beat up on each other and, make it so only, 2 of those teams go, and that New England.
And the AFC North does the same.
Yeah. And so you end up with the Bengals, Kansas City, we'll say San Diego, if they win the division, if they can beat Tennessee, then they're in. Or then they don't have to worry about everyone else. But let's say they end up second in the division, you need other teams to fall off so that way you can get there. And 10 wins might not get it done, but I think it will because of the 7th playoff spot.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it'll be interesting. When we get deeper into these shows, closer to September, and we start going through our predictions and so forth, it's going to be very interesting to see who just doesn't make the cut. Because you could argue, and Tennessee's going to argue, that they improved this offseason. So,
yeah, I think maybe I just like Indy's roster more than I should, but I think that they're a quality team top to bottom. And
I agree. I think if they were in the NFC, it'd be no problem.
oh yeah,
I'm just
easy.
looking at all these teams. There's
rough.
4 in the AFC West alone. Let's just say all 4 teams in the AFC make it. That leaves 3 of the division winners.
Yep, and that's it
to get in, and that's it. So if Tennessee wins the division, they're out. I mean, that's all it would really take. Even if you eliminated one of those, and you said, Cincinnati and Cleveland need to get in, and then there's Baltimore. I mean, holy cow! So anyway, just kind of going off a little bit.
Yeah, it is a rough sell. This is like. For them, like they've got this roster which is like ready to compete, and they just needed quarterback play for the last few years, and now they've got it. We hope, maybe, with an aging Matt Ryan, but it might not be enough just because everyone else got better. The AFC is loaded. So much talent moved from the NFC to the AFC this year. There's just no doubt the AFC is like by far the better conference.
Yeah. Yeah. And, quite honestly, Matt Ryan's going to be a placeholder quarterback. It'll be interesting to see if he rises up and performs better than the last couple of years. Because that's what they're going to need. They're not going to be able to get a guy that's going to throw 15 interceptions and a guy that's can't get the ball down the field when he needs to and make the throws that he used to make. He needs to be able to make those throws. He's going to have an offense that's going to give him an opportunity and an offensive line that's one of the best in the business. And we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, I just, a couple of interesting teams. Just interesting for very different reasons, but both very interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. You can follow me at Alvstad NFL and follow the show at PF_Playbook on Twitter. You can follow us on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube, and make sure you subscribe and share. So until next time, take care, guys. Thanks for listening to the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. Bill is at Alvstad NFL. The show is at PF_Playbook. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube, and at our website, profootballplaybook.co.